I want to make art that pulls people in and makes them think and opens them up in a way that perhaps they weren't. The art itself is a tool to open somebody up and direct them back to their own life, like ask them questions within themselves. What is this saying to me? How do I feel about this? Or what does this have to do with me and my life?
I'm Brandon Vaidyanathan, and this is Beauty at Work, a podcast about how beauty shapes our world and the work that we do. In this season, we're looking at beauty in science. This episode is sponsored by Templeton Religion Trust and the Institute for Advanced Catholic Studies at the University of Southern California. More about them later in the show.
Hello and welcome, everyone. I am delighted to welcome my guest today to the podcast, Wayne Brezinka. Wayne is an award-winning artist based in Nashville, Tennessee, and his signature style of art incorporates detailed mixed media and assemblage techniques applied to discarded and repurposed materials. Wayne has been a contributing artist to numerous publications, including the Washington Post, New York Times, Politico Europe, and others. Wayne, thanks so much for joining me on the podcast. It's such a pleasure to see you again.
It's wonderful to be with you. Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, Wayne, I think we first met in, was it 2018? I think at Lady Lodge at a retreat where you led an art workshop. I remember that because it was a scary experience for me, like it probably is for a lot of people who do your workshops, where, I as a kid loved sketching. I really enjoyed sketching. I was really good at it. And I would do movie posters of Bollywood movies, and kids in my class would sort of, make requests for me to do this or that. But I sucked at like anything requiring scissors or glue or paint, like multiple paints, and you had us do these collages that brought back a lot of bad memories, but it was a good experience nonetheless. I feel like I don't quite have that kind of coordination that some of my other kids loved, the crafts, that they were really into making things that required more complex skills. But I'm curious to know just your own childhood and the role of art in your childhood. What was that like?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me speak with you and your audience. I'm nervous, to be honest. I've been kind of not wanting to be here in a way that I think if I, in my head, shared that with people, they could relate to it. So, but I'm going to just be honest and do my best and share, my heart with you and the listeners. But as a child, I think we're all born artists. We're all, we all come into this world with the creative gift and can create and dance and, do creative things before we can speak. So I really believe that we're all born artists. And so with that in mind, I was drawing and using my crayons at a young age in kindergarten. In fact, there's one story of me not finishing my coloring assignment in time to go to recess, and I was completely fine with that. All of my, peers were outside on the field playing, and I was inside finishing, my coloring assignment. But yeah, I think as children, we don't really understand. I didn't understand the why or the reason, or have the tools to sort through, logically why it drew me, but it pulled me in and still has me in its grip today. So,
wow. And did you know as a child, as you were going through middle school, high school, like that this is what you wanted to do, to be an artist, or were there other things you were pursuing, or what was your trajectory like?
Well, I was born in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and then my family and I moved north in the country, which is about 2 hours from Minneapolis. And so I grew up on a gravel road in farm country, and going to a school that had 400 children from kindergarten through 12th grade. So there were 39 kids in my graduating class. And so art for me in that community I had this battle in my head of it not being well accepted in such a small farming community, and kind of looked down upon and not really understood. And so I had this kind of shame, rattling around in my head about, pursuing art and it not being masculine or, not being a part of the community type thing. But I still pushed through that, and I still pursued and followed its calling, if that makes sense. And what was your question?
You're answering it. I mean, it's just whether, did you know you wanted to be an artist? And perhaps, I mean, you talk about it as a calling. I mean, what was it like to feel, like, what did you feel? Like, what was the calling? When did you feel it? What did that look like for you?
I always felt, and I still do today, I feel alive when I'm making something. When I'm creating, I feel connected to myself and to something bigger, some other, whether you call it God or the universe or whatever. And I have this visceral feeling in my body as I'm making something that just lights me up. And it's in those moments, and they're fleeting. They last for a few seconds or maybe a minute. But I understand in those times that I should keep going and keep doing what I'm doing, keep using this gift, if you will. And really, as of late, believe that's why I'm here on the earth, is to make and create and to point people to beauty, point people to something outside of themselves that, might connect them back to themselves, and art, I think, is a beautiful way to do that.
Yeah. And that word beauty, did that mean much to you as a kid or as you were growing up? I mean, did like recognizing that this is somehow important to you? What did that look like?
I didn't really think about, language the way that I do today. I'm an avid reader of poetry today, and the language in poetry, it's been said you can't argue with a poem. The language is what it is, and you feel something or you dismiss something while reading it. And so as a child, language, and again, in the farm community, it didn't really hold as much weight, I think, for me as it does now. And I think I'm blooming and growing and just, opening up in so many different ways. I'm 55 years old, and I kind of am astounded at the growth that's happened for me in the last 10 years, which I love. I feel very alive and content and open and in ways that I wasn't as a child or as a younger person. And there's, regret for not feeling and being this open now, having not been that way as a younger person. But I didn't understand. I didn't know different,
Yeah. Did you face any sort of opposition? I mean, you mentioned that, it sort of wasn't taken very seriously, but I mean, did it require a lot of courage on your part to invest in becoming an artist? And what were your parents', reactions like, or others in your family, in your community, to your pursuit of this path?
I think it was encouraged. It wasn't discouraged by any means, but it also, I felt, it wasn't voiced by people, but I felt by my peers in school, particularly like a questioning, like this energy from them was like, what? Like, what do you, like, if they were into football or, track or on the, sporting events or whatever. But my father actually taught me how to draw. Like when I was a younger person, maybe 7, 8, 9 years old, I was drawing a portrait of some particular person. And I remember him sitting down and helping me look at the reference photo that I was using and the drawing that I was making and kind of showing me how to construct certain features of the face, And so he's got the gift. He's got the creative talent. That's where I get it from, is my father. And my mother's also very creative as well. But so it wasn't necessarily discouraged, but I didn't feel like, it was this like over encouragement of, this is a vocation possibility for you. There was not that, and that came from me just investigating possibilities of how can you make a living at art? Is there a way to do it?
Yeah. What was that like for you? I mean, how did you go about, I suppose, getting started as an artist?
After I graduated from high school, well, first of all, I exhausted all of my art classes in high school by the time I hit 9th grade. So I was not able to take any more art classes past 9th grade. So I absolutely loved it. But when I graduated, I worked for a year, put myself through, saved up money and put myself through a vocational school. So I went to a 2-year, 18-month program for graphic design. And that was at the very beginning of the computer, entrance into the world. And so we were learning computer programs and how to use the machine as a tool to design, which was very awkward in the early 90s. But so I graduated and then got my first job as a graphic designer at an advertising agency. So my old life is a designer for book jackets and letterhead, cover letterheads and business cards and logos and things like that. It just kind of has opened up. I've never really known where I'm going, which is kind of the beauty of my career is I just go, well, I think I'll step over here and things open up, or I'll go over here and things open up. And it's just following that feeling of, calling, I guess. There's that word again.
Yeah. I mean, so you were working as in the advertising world as a designer, and at what point did you break out on your own and start working as an artist full time? What was that transition like?
Yeah. So I went to graduate from high school, moved north in Minnesota. Still stayed in the state of Minnesota for a few years. Worked at the advertising agency up in Duluth, Minnesota, right on Lake Superior, the northernmost part of the state. I've been fired a few times in my life, and so that was one of them. I was very social, like a butterfly, bouncing around from everybody's office, like with my coffee, wanting to know how their weekend was and what they were doing, and that didn't go over very well because I wasn't working to their the way they felt I should be producing. But so I moved back home to my parents, and I had this desire to move to Nashville because that's where the music hub was at the time, and still is. But I love music. I've always been passionate about it. And
do you play as well?
I don't play. I played in high school, the drums, the clarinet, in high school band, but I don't, play in terms of or sing. But so I visited Nashville a few times with the intent of discovering or hoping to land a job at a record label to do record album packaging in the early 90s. And after my third visit here, I thought, well, the only way to actually find out is to make the move and see if I can, make it happen. And I packed up my blue Oldsmobile. I call it my grocery getter in 1993, put all of my belongings in it. And it was really difficult for my parents and my family at the time for me to move so far away from them. But, I just took the risk and made the drive and moved in with two people I didn't know. They were, my world opened up, from this small little farming community into a large city, which was kind of scary as hell for me, but a little kick in the pants to kind of like just, see the world in a new way,
Yeah.
I wasn't here for but 3 months and landed my first job at another advertising agency, doing book jackets and logos and, design for banks and things like this. And I was appreciative. I enjoyed it, but it didn't light me up. I still had the desire to do album packaging. And at that time, I met my wife at a church here in Nashville, and we were at some function. And when you're talking to somebody, I think I maybe mentioned this to you before, in a room full of people, where you're looking at that person that's in front of you, but you're actually listening to the conversation behind you, but you're nodding and going, yeah, to that person,
right.
but you're really connected back here. Well, the woman that was behind my ear was the creative director for one of the record labels that I wanted to work for. And I overheard her say that they had a position available to, they were looking for somebody to hire. And I kind of flipped out, and the next week, I think she called me and said, would you like to interview for this position? We had become friends, her and her husband, and Stacy and I, my wife, Stacy, we were hanging out for dinner and enjoying each other's company. And I said to her, there's only under one condition. I said, and that is if I'm the right person for the job. Don't hire me because, we're friends or that you know me. I said, I want to be qualified for the position. And so thus began the interview process. And I got the job. And it was probably the funnest, I mean, we played practical jokes on each other. Our little creative, office was shut off from the rest of the corporate record label. And so we would pull pranks on each other and just have the best time. And this is all going somewhere to your question, but
sure.
I was there for about 4 years, and one Friday afternoon, I get a knock on my door. I had a real swanky office. I had big picture window, furniture. I mean, it was super nice. And my door was shut this Friday afternoon, and so I get a knock on the door, and it's my boss. And she says, "Do you have a minute?" And I said, "Sure." So I get up and walk out, and in the entryway of the creative services department were my colleagues, and they were all kind of congregating at the reception desk, which on a Friday, that's what pretty much everybody did because they were ready to go home. It was about 4:30 in the afternoon. And her door opened in, and she had already walked in, and she said, "Do you mind shutting the door?" And so I walk in, my heart's beating. I'm like, what is this going on? And as I shut the door, behind her door was a table, and at that table was her boss. And she says, "Have a seat." And I said, "Oh man, what's happening?" So they proceeded to fire me. Wow. And they told me why. They gave me 3 reasons why. And one of the reasons, well, all of them, I had never heard these, 3 reasons prior to that meeting. But one of them was they said I was not providing the marketing team with what they were, requesting from me, the services they were requesting. I'm like, we kind of bump heads, but that's part of working things out. And she said, "We need you to take your furniture, to pack everything up and leave today." And I said, "There's no way. I have too much stuff. I can't, fill my little Toyota Corolla car with all my stuff." Right. And I come back, on a Saturday. And she said, she looked at her boss and she said, "Yeah, we can work that out." So she met me there with her husband. And then I brought a friend of mine with me to pack up all of my stuff on Saturday. And I share this when I teach my workshops. I share this story with my students sometimes. But I had the last box of stuff under my arm, and I had the other hand was on the doorknob, but she was on the inside of the door. And I turned around and I said to her, I said, "Thank you." I said, "This has been the most incredible job that I've ever had, and I wish you well." And then I left. But I can't tell you what in me, caused me to say those words. But what I learned in hindsight after, a year or 2 later was that often in life, how we exit a situation, whether it be a relationship, a marriage, or a friendship, or a job, speaks far greater than how we enter, And so the posture that you carry when you leave a situation is what I learned. And it was almost intuitive or an instinct that I had. It wasn't something that came out of my mind. But the following week, she called me back to freelance, as a freelance artist in the same office, which kind of blew my mind. But it was at that time, in answer to your question, that I began to put my foot further in fine art and illustration, if you will, for some of these publications that you mentioned at the top of the interview. And it slowly, began to open up for me after I was fired for the second time.
Right. Wow. I mean, did that feel like prompting to sort of do things on your own? And because going from the stability and security of a job where you're getting a paycheck to freelancing, I mean, how was that transition? I mean, was that difficult, or did you feel comfortable? Like, how did you go through that?
It was very difficult. It was very stressful. What they didn't know, the folks at my job that I was just fired from, was that my wife and I were pregnant with our second child, and none of them knew that at the time. So she was, great with child. And here I am coming into the house that we just bought. And I said, I lost my job, and it was very stressful. But the only instinctual thing I knew to do was to freelance and just put my name out into the, pool of local Nashville people. And I soared. I mean, it just took off. I mean, I did better as a freelance graphic designer than I did, working for a company. So it all worked out. But one of the things I've learned lately is that, and I don't think it takes a while for people in general to understand that in life, there's a tension. There's this tension of unresolved issues. And when you can understand that that's life, and if you can live and balance on that tightrope with unresolved issues, you're going to do great. And you kind of hold your arms open to the unknown rather than demanding an answer or demanding closure for something. That's really not how life works. But it's helped me tremendously lately to understand it's going to unfold. It'll work out. But at the time, when you have a second child on the way, and I was in my 30s probably, it's much more difficult to understand that.
Right. Wow. So what's this journey been like for you? I mean, the past couple of decades, how would you characterize that? The work of an artist, what is it like?
Well, I'll tell you this. A lot of people from the outside looking in, my neighbors, friends, people that come up to me that maybe have been familiar with my work, they say, "Oh, wow, you get to make art all day. It must be amazing. What a great job, And I kind of half smile and I say, well, if you only knew, it's a job. You go down to the studio and there are days you don't want to work and just like any other vocation. And it's work, the bottom line is it's work and it's a lot of hustle. But what I found that feeds me is creating work that is coming from the inside, something that's stirring in me in terms of producing something that I feel like the world might be interested in, if that makes any sense. So it's risking putting a part of myself out into the world. And there are a lot of ups and downs. I mean, I had a really painful summer. This past summer, it was very, very slow. There was not much happening with commissions or things, going on. But, this too shall pass. I mean, there are these moments that we all have in our life that they won't last. I mean, we kind of were in them for a spell and then they will subside. But so being an artist is a lot like that. It's like a roller coaster. I have highs and I have lows and I have these ups and downs and successes and then kind of, things slow down. But I've learned that, wherever I am, it's going to change. It'll be different. It's like feelings, they pass, right? They're not forever.
Yeah. I want to ask you about beauty again, since we're talking about beauty at work as the theme of the podcast, and there are a number of dimensions of beauty or dimensions of work where you might find beauty. And one of them, you've talked a bit about process, and I don't know if you'd say there's any. Would you say there's beauty in the process of work, right? Because there are days when, certainly, as you say, you don't want to go to work, but are there experiences that you would consider beautiful in the process of making art?
I would say, obviously, the right answer that you want to hear is yes. But I believe that. I really believe that is true. The process itself is life-giving to me in terms of the collecting of pieces or ephemera, pieces of paper or objects or things like this that have a story in and of themselves. So I bring a lot of these pieces together to form a greater story. And so it feeds me. I mean, that making process, I come alive with the history of the objects or the subject that I'm bringing to life through these pieces and parts, which also, I think, speaks to my draw to the human face and to portraiture, which I've done a lot of portraits in my career. But the complexity of human beings and our face, everybody's drawn to the face of another being in relationship because that's how we communicate, is by looking at each other. It's like John O'Donohue, the poet John O'Donohue says, we engage each other and we see each other, but we don't really know each other. We don't know the interior world, of somebody. And so my portraiture consists of a lot of objects and complexities, that when they're brought together, they form the visual of the person that I'm bringing to life. And that's why I love mixed media art, is because you can pull a little bit from each direction or collect objects and bring them together to tell a larger story. They each have their own little story in and of themselves, but you bring them together and it's this giant puzzle that, has a draw for people to be curious more about.
You're listening to Beauty at Work. This episode of the podcast is sponsored by Templeton Religion Trust as part of a grant on the aesthetic dimensions of science. Templeton Religion Trust supports projects as well as storytelling related to projects that seek to enrich the conversation about religion. To learn more about them, visit templetonreligiontrust.org. This episode is also sponsored by the Institute for Advanced Catholic Studies, a global research center located at the University of Southern California. IACS works to create dialogue, spark ideas, and sustain academic research on Catholic thought, creative imagination, and lived experience. Learn more at iacs.usc.edu. If you're enjoying the show so far, please subscribe to our podcast and take a moment to leave us a review.
Talk about the products, right? So talk about the work you produce and how you've developed, what you have is, I think, really unique style. How did that come about, and how would you characterize your art, or how do, perhaps maybe how do people describe Wayne Brezinka's art, and then, to what extent do you agree with those descriptions?
Well, I tell you this, it's very dimensional. There's a lot of depth to my work in person. It's very difficult to communicate that on digital platforms, on the computer, on online, on my website. Often people will see it, they'll be attracted to it, they'll like it, and then they'll come to a show and say, "Oh my gosh, I had no idea your work was 3D." And I go, "Well, how could that be?" Because I'm trying my best to communicate that it's got shadow and depth. And it's you mentioned the word signature, which my associate Laura actually wrote that in the bio. I think that, I'm looking at a piece over here. That's why I keep looking off the side. But there's a portrait of Willie Nelson. I was commissioned by the Washington Post to do Willie Nelson's obituary portrait. He's not passed away yet, but so it's not public. But that's what I'm looking at in the corner. There's a lot of pieces and parts, and it has grown over the years. My style has kind of taken on its own life in terms of, I'll put pieces of foam board under cardboard or pieces of paper to raise it up more. And I just found I found it very interesting as I was working several years ago with the shadow and the depth, and it just began rising off the canvas more. And it wasn't planned. It wasn't thought through. It just kind of morphed into this style. But and I teach when I lead workshops. I teach my students about it. And I have a friend who's the CEO of a restaurant here in Nashville, and very successful at what he does. And I was afraid to begin teaching several years ago and share my secrets, if you will, on how I make my work. And he said, "Wayne, you have to remember that people aren't going to steal from you. They're not going to be able to do what you do. And the more that you widen your circle, the more you share, the more your circle widens. So the more you're like this and you're fearful about sharing how you do what you do, or, in your case, expanding on beauty and the topic of beauty. And the more you open up, the greater your circle becomes. And so I've shared very freely about how I create and the techniques I use for, the hair on people, or the depth of using foam board and things like that. But yeah, I mean, it's just kind of taking on its own life.
Yeah. So it has to be seen in person to really to get a sense of the depth and the dimensionality of what you're creating, right?
Yeah, I'll show you. I mean, if I can hold this piece up to the camera, let me grab one real quick. I think you can. Can you see the depth of the foam board underneath here?
Yeah.
But, when the light hits it a certain way, you can see the shadow.
Exactly.
And it almost becomes, and actually it goes, that's the right way, I guess, is it? Like this.
Right.
But yeah, so there's pieces of paper like music sheets and cloth and, old written notes from people, which I love. Anything vintage, any handwritten journal entries or things like that. But, and it's on a wooden panel, that's about 2 inches thick. But that's what I mean. The depth and the shadow and the complexity of the image it takes on a life of its own.
Yeah. And you've done, portraits of some, some very famous people. I mean, I think, is it typically like obituaries? I mean, I recall Mr. Rogers. There was one that was recent. There's something about how that come about. Like, how do you get commissioned to do those pieces, what the response has been from families of people who are, who you've captured in your work.
Yeah, I mean, I've done a few portraits for the Washington Post, several presidents for them. And I learned early on in my career, when you think about a publication like the Washington Post or a magazine, the digital image that gets printed is not very large. It's a small image. But I learned early on that if I am commissioned to make these works, why not make them larger, like museum size, in hopes that they might, be picked up by a museum or some, public place that might want to acquire them. And so I started to build them, much larger. And the Washington Post commission of President Obama was for the first part of his book, like part one of A Promised Land. So it was in support. The image was printed on the cover of the Outlook section in support of his book that came out a few years ago. And once that published, the museum, the Obama Foundation contacted me. So there's interest. Like people see it, it's published, and they begin to have interest in the images. The Mr. Rogers piece that you referenced was self-inspired, actually. I was in the movie theater with my wife watching the documentary that came out, several years ago, Won't You Be My Neighbor? In tears, just like, oh my gosh, I get inspired by other people, other individuals. And sometimes it draws me to create and bring them to life in portrait form. George Floyd, the murder of George Floyd several years ago, I was so moved by, to tears. I just brought his, portrait to life as well. But the Mr. Rogers portrait, I contacted the company up in Pittsburgh. I didn't even know if there was a Mr. Rogers company existing, in 2021 or 2022, whenever I did that portrait. And so I got online and just Googled, and Fred Rogers Production Company is still, obviously still around. And so thus began the conversation with the Mr. Rogers neighborhood. And they were very open and said that, Wayne, you can't just create this without our permission. You need permission from, they're very protective of his likeness. And so we began a dialogue back and forth. And then I have an attorney friend that, drew up a contract, and that both the attorneys started talking to each other. And they gave me permission to bring that to life with the understanding that, I would find a place to exhibit it. Well, it ended up in 5 different locations around the country and took on its own life. But it was very fun to do. Mrs. Rogers got involved. She called me, at my studio as I was finishing it up one day. And I had no idea who it was a call from Pittsburgh. And she goes, Wayne, this is Mrs. Rogers. And I said, what? And she says, I can't wait to see your portrait of Fred, and we chatted for a few minutes. It was a lovely conversation. And she said at the onset, I'm going through Fred's things and I found a few of his bow ties. Would you like me to send them to you?
Wow.
And I said, yes. I said, that would be beautiful, and we finished our conversation. And right before we hung up, I asked her a question. I said, Mrs. Rogers, I would love to honor you, in this work. And is there anything in particular that you can think of that might be, whether it's an object or something that you might consider offering of your own? And she paused for a minute and she said, well, there is one thing. And I said, well, what's that? And she goes, it's a photograph of Fred and I taken shortly before he died. Mm-hmm. She said, it's my favorite photograph of us together. I'll send that to you. And so in the package, she put this picture, and you can see it. I'll send you an image of it. But he's got, and she has the brightest, most engaging smiles, on their face, and they're standing next to each other. But and then she traveled to Washington, D.C. to Ann and David Brooks hosted, an unveiling of the portrait at their home, and she was there. She came and saw it for the first time. It was just, moments like that, Brandon, that just things just start opening up, and, the art is part of it, but it's the life of the people around it. I think that's much more, life-giving, I think, than just looking at the art itself. But
the way in which art, I guess, connects you and opens you up to people, right, is also part of the process, it seems. Talk about beauty, and as much as it is an object of what you're trying to create. I mean, to what extent are you trying to create beauty, or if not beauty, what is it that you're trying to do, right? Because I imagine in some works beauty is not the object, and it's not the goal. Could you talk about those differences? When are you trying to create something that you would consider beautiful and that's the goal, and when are you trying to create something else, and what are you trying to pursue there?
I think that in life, I've learned, in regards to your question, beauty is engaged, the impact of beauty for me personally, I'll just say for me, bumping up against the darkness and the grief and sorrow of life. I think to truly, really engage beauty, you have to hold in tandem this darkness or this grief that we all have, and so for me personally, that has helped myself as an artist open up more. I've always been afraid of beauty, to be honest. I mean, when I was a younger artist, the word beauty and art and me being, it ties into my story of my own, past, my own trauma. But the word beauty and male and me being 6'3" and being an artist, there was always this like push pull of like, this isn't something you should be doing. And, you grew up in the country. Like there was always this like, it's not masculine, you need to be doing something, all this bullshit, in my head. So over the years, I've engaged that on a deeper level through, poetry, through journaling, through, being with my friends, dialogue and conversation. And I've opened up, almost like these poppies, like just like opened up. My life has opened up in a way that I truly am appreciative and grateful for in terms of your question. So I don't set out to, necessarily always make something that's beautiful, but the intention of my work is to, I guess the opposite of that would be, not just make pretty things. I want to make art that pulls people in and makes them think and opens them up in a way that perhaps they weren't. The art itself is a tool to open somebody up and direct them back to their own life, like ask them questions within themselves. Like, what is this saying to me? How do I feel about this? Or, what does this have to do with me and my life? These are the questions I want people to ask themselves as they look at my work sometimes. Or if it's a subject or a portrait of a particular person, like, well, what does he or she have to do with me? So I think the beauty is in that. The beauty is the question. The beauty is the curiosity. The beauty is the unknown and the mystery. Those are other, words and ways of being that I've grown to love, is mystery and imagination and just the unknown. As humans, we want to solve. We want answers. We want to know the why. And I think the beauty in life is the unknown and the mystery and the openness, right? And that's in the art too,
Mm-hmm. Are there, do you have examples of your work where you found that response to be quite easily forthcoming, where people tell you that this really has opened them up or has led them to, is raising questions for them? Like, are there a few, a couple of pieces that come to mind for you where you're getting that response pretty immediately?
Yes. There's a couple different, one actually was a piece that I created when you invited me to Washington earlier this year. It was, I think I actually called the piece "Flourish." But I had this dream, prior to making this work. So I wanted something personal to bring, to speak about. And I was out in the universe. This is my dream. I was standing out in the universe, completely unclothed, not in a graphic, sexual way, but just out there, just with my arms open. Really not knowing, just feeling very comfortable, feeling, trusting this bigger something. But underneath in the image, in the art, is this, very angry wolf kind of like coming up at my feet. I'm actually, standing on the snout of this wolf. And so there's a lot of tension in that image. You've got this figure that's unclothed, that's very vulnerable, and you also have this dark, it could be, it doesn't have to be dark, but you've got this, ravaging wolf kind of leaping at the heels of a human being. And again, what I mentioned earlier, I think in life that's how, many of us, if we're honest, that's who we are. There is this beauty and this openness and this trusting and this, hope in something bigger. But there's always this darkness underneath, right? And so you can't have one without the other. There's the both hands. And so I wanted to illustrate that in the work, which I'll share that image with you after we finish. But there were questions about it, at the event, and judgments, and this is what it means for me. And, ooh, that's a very evil looking image. And I'm like, okay, that's great. People see what they want to see, right? And that's part of the beauty of art too, is you can't force, what I was hoping people to engage and witness on them. You have to let them bring their own narrative to it. And so that's why I love making art too, because it doesn't solve, I love that phrase, we see what we want to see in life, and wherever we are at that time is what we're looking for, right? If you're looking for beauty, you're going to see it. If you're looking for the other shoe to drop, it's going to happen. So how do we kind of exhale and just be, do the next thing on our list, if you will, and be okay with that? I mean, I don't know. I'm rambling now, but
I see what you mean. Yeah, no, it was a very striking piece, and I'm really glad that you brought that along, because it was. I think it was a great catalyst for a lot of reflection, a lot of discussion, and I recall feeling that tension between a kind of yearning for the infinite and this sort of part of us that threatens to devour that. And so that was my kind of reaction to it, right? That we, on the one hand, are sort of really drawn to infinity, and on the other hand, there's sort of the wolf within that wants to devour everything, and so. But you said there was another one that came to mind?
There is. I don't know if you've seen it. It's on my website. I'll share it. It's my personal trauma art that I created years ago, just around my own story. And I'll share the link with you. It's written about, and the visuals are there, and there's wolves in that one as well.
Right. Yeah, and that evoked a similar reaction from people.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, more so than the one that I just talked about. But I mean, the one that it's called "Preyed Upon Prey" is this image, and it's very large. It's 6 feet, 5 feet by 4 feet, and 38 inches deep. It was a big installation piece that I was moved to bring to life, but scared as hell to do. I had a client that was doing a dream journal. And she said, would you be interested in bringing one of your own dreams to life, for this cover of our inaugural journal? And I said, well, yeah, maybe, I might be. And when she invited me, the first thought was this nightmare I had as a child, come to mind, that I should bring to life in art. And I just pushed it down. I thought, nah, I'm not going to do this. We continued our dialogue on email, and through some conversations with some friends of mine, here in Nashville, musician friends, some artistic friends, I said, I'm thinking about this, but I'm scared to bring it to life and let people see it, and they said, well, you need to, you must, I showed them the sketches, and they go, you got to do this, and so not only did I bring it to life, but I made it this huge, massive, installation piece, and not knowing really, I was kind of pissy about it. And I thought, why am I doing this? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Who cares? No one cares. It's going to go on the cover of this journal, and that'll be all fine. But it sat in my studio when I finished it. And after, I turned in the image for the journal, and I had a workshop attendee sign up and come to make her deposit. And actually, ironically, she's coming to my studio today again, this afternoon. But she came, her name is Kathy, but she came to my old studio with her deposit for the workshop. And just like many people that come in here, they get excited and they want to look around and go, oh my gosh, this is where the magic happens, and blah, blah, blah. And she saw that piece in the corner of my studio, and she said, what is this? I go, well, that's my personal story. That's my trauma as a child. And she her hands kind of just went like this, and she started to cry, when she was looking at this piece. And it was at that moment, Brandon, that I realized the power of art. This was maybe 2014, 2013. So however many years ago. But I thought, what is happening? She was literally in tears, And she said, this is my story. She says, I've never told anybody. that what you made is my story. She handed her deposit over to me and she left the studio and she drove, away, and she texted me later and she said, I drove around for 3 hours after I left your studio crying in my car. And she said, that is my story. I've never told anybody that before. And I was like, whoa. And there was another moment where a client came to my studio, a mother with her teenage daughter who was recording a record in Nashville. And they came for a meeting to talk about the record packaging and, the art for the package. And they came in very excited to be in my studio and walk around, and they saw that piece the mother did. And she said, what is this? And I said, well, that's my personal story. And there was a chair. You can kind of see, I don't know if you see the chair. There's a chair it's that chair over there. But she kind of fell into it. And she said, that's my son's story. He was molested by his Cub Scout leader. And I was like, what? So, it just opened up. It, I think, gave people permission. It was a visual, a piece of art that gave people permission to speak and to say, for them what was true. And for them it was, probably decades of having not being able to have the words or the dialogue to speak, to push the words out. But anyway, that's the piece that I'm talking about that I'll share.
Yeah, no, that's really important, I think, because it's, what's at stake there is perhaps not beauty, right? There's something else going on, and maybe there is a sense of beauty and a kind of aptness in the way in which what you created expresses an experience, right, that people can immediately connect with and resonate with. And I don't know if beauty is the right word for that, but it seems like a really important function of art to do that. And you've been doing some workshops around trauma, is that right? Could you say a little bit about that? Yeah. Yeah,
it's become one of my favorite things to do as a working artist is to facilitate and host and lead people back to themselves and help them, help the light come back on in their eyes, as I like to say. But just using the tools, using the scissors and the glue and the paint and the paper to a means to an end. And there are different, techniques that I use. I think obviously you've been in one of my workshops, but I let the art lead. I really am just the host or the facilitator, and I've become over the years trained and aware enough of the room to understand what might be happening for somebody or what might be opening up, and to just kind of let it take over. But it's been really, really powerful. Combat veterans, from Iraq and Afghanistan, emergency hospital care workers, nurses, doctors, ER doctors, and the general public, people in different vocations. But, art is a tool. It's not the only tool, but I think it's a really powerful medium to help an individual say something visually that maybe they don't have the words to speak out. So I absolutely love it. So I'm hoping it will open up more, opportunities for me to lead around the country. But
yeah, could you say what people experience there at this workshop? Like, what is doing art, particularly like using the techniques that you're leading them through? Or how does that help them process trauma, or what is the goal there? Or what have you seen happen?
Yeah, in the context of veterans, combat veterans, many of them have struggled for years mentally with their mental health. Maybe some of them have TBI brain injuries. There's a number of factors happening for veterans in particular, but art is a way. Perhaps talk therapy hasn't worked and other forms of therapy have not worked for them, but art and music are new, scientifically, proven methods to help an individual in ways that talk therapy or other forms of therapy can't. And so I've been fortunate to be invited into these nonprofits and groups of individuals who lead veterans through, using the arts as a way to healing. And the only way that veterans will trust me is if I'm honest about my own story, if I'm vulnerable about my own trauma. I'm not a veteran myself. I've never been to war. So the room changes. When I get honest and I talk openly about my past, I can, physically see the room change and the air let out of their lungs, and they feel safe in a way perhaps that they didn't before. Like they're kind of sizing me up. Like, what's this guy going to give us that we don't really know? But it's in that invitation and that gentle movement that I invite them to participate in certain exercises to, get them out of their head and close their eyes and come back here, and it's just incredible to watch what happens for them, individuals. And afterwards, many of them have sent me, they've got 3 or 4 pieces around here, but they'll send me pieces of art, kind of get emotional thinking about it, but they so grateful that somebody took the time, to see them and to, they'll text me, they'll send me poems, and they're alive, many of them are suicidal, had been, before. So that is what I love. It's like how I'm able to use the gift that I have, of art and making art, and not only solo in my studio, isolated down here, but taking it out, into groups and other people that can benefit them. And that's what I love, to help another.
Yeah, what is happening to them in that process, right? I mean, because I imagine a lot of people might be unfamiliar with the material or with the techniques, or maybe even, I think as I remember the first time trying, like playing with glue and when with these material, like feeling, oh no, I'm going to totally screw this up. It's going to be a big mess. Like, so how is that process healing? Like what happens in the course of them sort of giving themselves to that process?
Well, I think I've learned it has to be set up in a way that is disarming, right? Like there are many people who have had bad experiences as children with their art teachers or making art as children. And so going into a group of individuals, understanding that and actually giving them a place to voice that first, right, changes the room. And also, mentioning to them that I'm not necessarily interested in what you make. I think it's important what the outcome of your art is, but that it's not a piece that's going to be critiqued and judged on form and color and composition and all of that, in terms of the education aspect of art. But I'm more interested in what's happening for them as they're cutting and as they're making and as they're connecting to the image that they want to bring to life, or the, the thought that they have wrestled with, that they don't have words to articulate, but they want to bring it out in a visual form, So I'm there to help them as a guide bring this to life, And often those that are uneducated in art make the most incredible pieces of art that I've ever seen, as opposed to somebody who has an education and is academically trained, in the arts or in any form. But there's an individual I've been reading a couple years ago, Melodoma Somé. I don't know if you're familiar with his work, but he is from Africa and does a lot of soul initiation work and was academically trained in London, I think, in school, and would go back and visit his family in Africa. And they didn't. I mean, they kind of opposed the education aspect of things because it put walls around the soul, and the soul is very free. It's like a wild animal. And you can hope to see it and you can hope to engage it and bump into it. But, if you move too fast and too quick, you're going to scare it away. So, but anyway, I forget where I'm off on that. But art making and the not knowing is a gift in the context of a workshop, because the outcome is just incredible.
Yeah. Wow. Fantastic. What is perhaps some advice you might have for people who are struggling with appreciating art or making art? Are there any tips you might have, any advice you might have for how people could better engage with that?
Just do it. I mean, we can talk ourselves out of so many different things, Brandon, and you just have to put one foot in front of the other and move into the fear. They say your work, whatever you're afraid of, that's your work. So if you're afraid of making art, if you're afraid of speaking engagements, if you're afraid of, going out and dating somebody, or, that do it, like move into it and push into it. And so it's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be right. It's not going to be right. It's not the right word, but it's not, it may not be how you hope it will be. But the fact is you're doing it. You're actually stepping into this energy, right? And experimenting with that desire and that passion. And there's a term in recovery that many people use, and it's act as if, you step into this, even though you don't know how to do it, but you act as if, and then the acting as if becomes a known, way of being. And so I think that's true in art too. It's like I'm not a trained visual mixed media artist. I've just kind of discovered and learned on my own. And in some ways, I think that is more attractive than, being academically trained in visual form. And not always, but like there is meaning in university training. Don't get me wrong, but like the not knowing for me is proven to be beneficial and work. So I don't,
Yeah. What's on the horizon for you? I mean, where are you, seeing yourself in the next few years? Are there things that you're really drawn to, or what would be, maybe would be a beautiful way to live out your vocation as an artist in the next few years?
More workshop experiences. I mean, I think if I could find avenues and ways to plug into, different communities and different areas of teaching and facilitating, I mean, that is what feeds me really, what feeds me and what keeps me going as a solo, isolated working artist. I love music. I always crank up music down here, and I'm listening to music and podcasts as I, speaking of podcasts, I don't know. I mean, you're a big podcast guy, but my greatest discovery is a guy named Craig Ferguson. He's a comedian. I don't know if you know Craig Ferguson.
Sure. He had a big late night show, and Joy.
Are you familiar with it?
No. Wow.
It's fairly new. He's got maybe 7 episodes on it, but it's really just him sitting down with his friends, talking about what brings them joy, what in their life, keeps them going. And it's some of the most honest conversation, just sitting around one of his friends is a chef. So the chef friend makes a meal and they talk over this meal, and it's like, wow, hour and a half of conversation. But I'll listen to podcasts and music but being in the context of groups of people, I'm a very social person. I love other humans, but that's what I hope happens more this year.
Yeah. Well, I really enjoyed your workshops, and we had this retreat, 2 months ago maybe, and it was really a powerful experience, I think, for all of us to go through that workshop. And even in spite of I'm constantly feeling awkward around glue and scissors and cloth and collages and so on. But that wasn't, the point wasn't to make a masterpiece, right? I think I really appreciated the way in which we ended up developing these collaborative pieces and then discussing and interpreting them. And I think that was really quite an insightful experience for everybody. So, you really are, I think, I would say masterful at facilitating that kind of process. And suppose you never know what you're going to get, in a group of strangers coming together. And
it's a beautiful ending, though, isn't it? I mean, by collaborating on these pieces, and then in the rotating exercise, coming back to your home place where you started to look at the piece that, other individuals have touched and put their take on. It's proven to be a very powerful exercise for me to witness, but also for the people, engaging. And it pushes the discomfort button in many people, which is what I'm after. People don't like to leave the work that they started, and give it over to somebody else. I have to give somebody else, hands this. But that's part of the exercise. And that's what I think makes it beautiful, is this community aspect of, and respect. There was a lot of respect in, the positioning of certain items in these art pieces, and perhaps the not knowing of why, an image or an object is placed where it is, but the respect for leaving it there because it worked and it came together, for a purpose and a reason. But and then in the end, having the dialogue with the group about where the individual started with the art piece and what their vision was and what other people brought to it, it all made sense. It all came together, and it happens that way every time. It's a powerful, experience.
Yeah, fantastic, great. Wayne, where can we direct our listeners and viewers to so they can learn more about your work?
You can go to my website. It's my first and last name, WayneBrezinka.com, and there are many different images and pieces of work and links to different videos and things like that, show information. But yeah.
Awesome. Wayne, I really enjoyed this. It's always a pleasure talking to you. Any final thoughts on this theme of beauty at work that you want to leave us with? Well,
I'm delighted to be with you. And I was very nervous. I've told you this before, but I thought, gosh, what do I have to bring to the table? I really don't, measure up to Brandon and his group of people. And I was coming downstairs in my studio early this morning at 6:30, thinking about this interview, kind of dreading it, like, oh my God, I got this interview this morning. And I had my coffee in my hand. And then the question that came up in me was, what is this resistance, Wayne? Why? It's not Brandon. It's not his invitation. It's in yourself. Like, what do you think you don't have to bring or offer to the world, And then I thought, yeah, I got stuff to offer. So here we are.
Amazing. Yeah. That's true. Yeah, and you do. And I'm very grateful that you did chicken out, that you're here.
Yeah.
It's been a lot of fun. Thanks, Wayne. And
thank you, Brandon.
Yeah, hope to see you soon.
Good to be with you.
Hey everyone, thanks for listening to this episode of Beauty at Work. Please be sure to check out our show notes for more resources from our guest. And if you like this episode, please be sure to share it with your friends. And please leave us an honest review. We'd love to hear what you think, and it helps to get the word out about our show. Music edited by Venkat Subramaniam, and the podcast was edited by Dave Visaya from Podcast Engineers. And thanks again to our two sponsors, Templeton Religion Trust and the Institute for Advanced Catholic Studies at the University of Southern California. For a research project on beauty and science, visit wellbeinginscience.com. To learn more about our broader project on beauty at work, visit beautyatwork.net. Thanks again, and see you next time.